So when you tell them that, even though maybe it's going to be better, right? But you just tell them like, hey, we're going to change the way you do your job tomorrow, right? It's like, well, why are you going to do that? Like, well, there's
Yeah.
tons of pushback, right? And there's different levels too. I mean, some people are like, oh yeah, let's do it, like no problem, right? But there's going to be a large majority that typically are gonna, if you give them short notice like that, they're going to be, whoa, why are you trying to change it? And they're going to do everything in their mind that to discount like this change that you're trying to make, just because it is a disruption to their everyday flow and what they're used to.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, The Automation Journey, the podcast where we talk about all the different topics, challenges, questions you might face along the way in your own journey with automation. I'm your host, Marissa Dierlam, head of marketing for TGW North America. Joining me today remotely is Kevin Lawton of the new warehouse. So welcome.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. I know you all have been on my podcast. I know I get to be on yours. This is a great exchanging of podcasts here.
Yes, exactly. And I hope you don't feel too comfortable like having the mics turned around on you this time.
No. It's a little different, but I'm good. I'm comfortable, definitely.
Good. We're kind of getting at the name and premise behind our podcast. I think it'd be really interesting to hear about your warehouse journey, your automation journey, and just kind of all the twists and turns it's taken throughout. So if I'm remembering correctly, you kind of started really like as boots on the ground as it gets as a intern at Simon & Schuster, right? And then how did your career kind of go from there?
Yeah. I started at Simon Schuster. Actually started as a temp. I
Oh
came
gosh,
as
yeah.
a inventory control specialist. Had no real knowledge. I mean, I knew like warehouses existed, right? But had no knowledge like what goes on inside of there, or anything like that. My father, he ran warehouse operations, actually at a book publisher as well
Mm.
as part of his career. But the only remembrance I had of that was they had a Christmas party for the kids, and we would go in there, and they set up a train in the warehouse with
Oh, nice.
a tugger thing that they had in there,
Yeah.
which I didn't know what a tugger was. I know now, of course, but I just thought like, oh, Santa's here, right? But so yeah, that's where I started, and really got great exposure there into kind of what a distribution center looks like that's doing high volume. They actually had a lot of automation going on in there from a conveyor sortation perspective. So I got to work alongside a lot of that, and really got in the weeds deeply, being in that inventory control position, because my job really, and I was quickly brought on as a full-time employee from the temp position as well. But my job essentially was to figure out, why does the WMS say I have 20 units, and why
Mhm.
does ERP say we have 27, right? And figure out like, why is there a variance, and basically research that, drill into not only the data side of it, and the transactions that are happening within the system, but also on the physical side, go out into the warehouse and figure out like, well, where are these gaps occurring. And that really kind of got me engrossed in like the world of warehousing, because I got to talk to all
Yeah.
of the operations, really like investigate. And I think probably what I attached to was like the problem solving of it all, was really what
Mhm.
started to get my attention, and get my interest there, because it certainly was not like, I didn't grow up saying like, oh, I'm going to do all these things around warehousing, right? That was not like the dream in in any way. Yeah.
Cool. So then how did your career shape through there? And I guess kind of getting what you were just saying, is that really what drove you to think like, all right, warehouses are for me. Like this is where I'm gonna, stay put in my career. And yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think from there, I mean, it kind of evolved. It took a while for me to, I mean, I liked it. Definitely. I liked the problem solving. I liked, kind of, dealing with different things on a daily basis. But I was still kind of, I think in my head, like, I'm going to do something else with my career. Not sure what, but it was not. not going to be that necessarily. And then I kind of continued to evolve in my career after in Simon and Schuster. Was able to go to Keurig Green Mountain, and
Mm,
be there when they were going through like a ton of high growth, right? And
mm,
that brought a lot of different projects with it. I was still primarily focused on inventory control, but got the opportunity to be involved in new distribution center startups, went through an ERP change from Oracle to SAP. They leveraged 3PLs, so that was kind of like my first exposure to working with 3PLs as well. Got to go through a big 3PL transition, going from one 3PL to another 3PL, and got to be a big part of that. So that really opened up my eyes to a lot of the other possibilities too, as well. And
mhm,
that's kind of and I had a really great boss at the time there too,
mm,
who's well, that kind of really like pulled me into the warehouse. I like to say, and that really opened my eyes to this being like a longer term career, and seeing like the opportunities that were in there, and obviously seeing too that like and having the realization that like okay, this is something that is pretty much never going away. Like there's physical
mm.
product movement that need to happen in some regard, and I think that's really kind of where I started to evolve it. And then sometime after that, I started to think, okay, well, I need to learn more about this industry, right? If I'm going to spend like a significant amount of time in it, and and it was also like it was a hunger to grow too. It was like, okay, well, if I wait for my company to teach me, right, then I might be waiting a long time, right? So how do I go out
Mhm.
and how do I teach myself a little bit? How do I find some kind of education around that? And couldn't really find something necessarily that was like intriguing or that was digestible at the time. And this is like 2016, ish when I
Yeah.
really started like, how do I learn more here? And so I decided that maybe I'll start something myself. And I had done some writing, freelance work like on the side, and that was a whole part of that thing where like, what am I really going to do with my life? And actually had done a radio show previously,
Oh, interesting.
that was focused on real estate at my alma mater, because I thought I was going to do real estate at one point too,
Mhm,
as I got out of school. And then, I was like, "Okay, well, how do I take these things that I've done and combine it with warehousing?" And was gonna start a blog, but then, that proved very quickly because I was actually in the middle of a big project, putting in automation and opening a new, distribution center,
mm.
that I was like, "Wow, I don't have time to sit down and write. I don't have time to edit and even figure out, like, how does this go out into the world?" And actually that same boss, he hired me 3 times, actually, 3 different companies, just
Mm.
kept taking me with him. He was like, "Oh, I hear this thing called podcasts are, like, becoming a thing, like, what about a podcast?" So that's really kinda where the idea of the new warehouse came about, and really started as a self-education vehicle to learn more about the industry, and then continue to do that like on the side, and continue to work in warehouse operations. And then about I guess about 3 years ago was when I kind of like went full time with the
Mm.
new warehouse, and started building this, and realized that oh, this maybe is the thing I've been looking for all along. And now
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, there's a lot of things I wanna talk more about with you. I think that's such a great summary. One that's coming to mind is you talked about how you've had to implement all sorts of changes, whether it's switching software, adding technology, even a new DC and starting that up. So I'd be curious to hear more your experience and thoughts around change management. How do you get people excited, on board with it? Because besides all of the hard work of actually implementing these new things, there's the human aspects too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is, amongst all of the kind of exciting and really cool things that happen within our industry, like at the crux of it all, I think is change management, right? I mean, I think that's such a huge aspect of it, and you kind of hit the nail on the head there that it's like it's the human element of it, right?
Mm,
Like the software might work fine, the hardware goes in place, just the way it's supposed to go in place, like the
hopefully.
and yeah, hopefully, right? Robot, I've certainly been in position where it hasn't too. All this stuff, but all that stuff, I mean, can work just fine. But if like the humans are not willing to work with it or adopt it and get it into their everyday workflows, then you got a real challenge like ahead of you to be able to do that. And you're not going to get the effectiveness in what you invested in, right? So I think the change management approach to it, it starts very, very early in the process of communicating like what is actually happening. And I think that is such a key element for like just the human mind in general. Like we just inherently want to know why, right? And I think if
Yes.
you think about warehouse operations and the people that work in them on a daily basis on the floor, right? They come in and, at minimum, they're doing 40 hours. A lot of them are doing a lot more. Overtime is, super common within warehouse operations. So they are used to like working like in a standard way, right? And we preach standardization like crazy, right? So there's no surprise there that they are. So when you tell them that, even though maybe it's going to be better, right? But you just tell them like, hey, we're going to change the way you do your job tomorrow, right? It's like, well, why are you going to do that? Like, but there's
Yeah, yeah.
tons of pushback, right? And there's different, different levels too. I mean, some people are like, oh yeah, let's do it, like no problem, right? But there's going to be a large majority that typically are going to, if you give them a short notice like that, they're going to be, whoa, why are you trying to change it? And they're going to do everything in their mind that's to discount like this change that you're trying to make just because it is a disruption to their everyday flow and what they're used to, right? I mean, it's the same, you think about you go into your kitchen like or the refrigerator, like you always got the butter in the same place. All of a sudden, like somebody puts the butter in a different place, like
Yeah, yeah.
you're not even looking, you're just like yelling in the house, like, where's the butter? Right? Like it's like such a change to what you're used to. So that communication early on, I think, is like the key point of like not only like just letting them know, hey, we're gonna make a change, but also I think the why is so important. Like,
Mhm.
why are you gonna change what I do every day? And like how is it what's the benefit gonna be to me, right, as an individual? But then also like what is the benefit to the company as a whole or like the customer that we're serving at the end of the day? Like if they're involved in that understanding of why, like they may not be involved in like the details of the
Right.
implementation and things like that, but if they understand like what are we doing and where are we going, then I think it's much easier for them to shift their thinking and go along with the change to be able to do that. I think that becomes even more important, especially as we see more and more technology like coming into
Mhm.
the warehouse space. Like that communication is so key for the human element of it all.
Yeah, and besides the communication up front, I think you need to think about training too. Like, how much did that come up,
Yeah.
and when were you already starting to get people ready for the new changes in standardization and process and all of that stuff?
Yeah, yeah, the training aspect I think is so important too as well because and especially like when we look at some of these larger organizations, like the like one organization I was a part of, I mean, huge, like,
Mhm.
multi-billion dollar company. I think at the time, 11,000 employees, something like that, right? So the company is all over the place, like all over the country, all over the world, right? And you have pockets where, you're not necessarily siloed, but you're kind of like on your own a little bit. You're not necessarily remote, but it's like small team in a location, and there's like 10 of us, right? Amongst 11,000, right? And it's how do you deliver training to those people, but also understand like what is happening in their world on a day-to-day basis. And, a lot of
Mhm.
time that training, like, we saw this where the training was very much remote. Like some of it was kind of like, all right, it's on demand. So like you got to do it on your own. And this was like a transition to a totally new software. And there were people, like, the day of go live that, like, were kinda, like, having breakdown, like, "I don't even know how to do my job now. Like,
Mhm.
what am I gonna do?" So, like, how do you make sure that training is sufficient on all fronts? And I think sometimes we take for granted that, like, alright, we have a large portion of our employees at the home office, right? And we feel
Mhm.
like they're solid, they got in person, but, like, did we really cater and deliver to those people that are,
Right.
somewhat remote or removed from that day-to-day basis? So I think that is, like, a huge driver because you will have people that are basically just feel like, I have no idea what I'm doing now, right? Like, and,
Mhm.
what do I do next? And, is my job it's, threatened now because I don't know what I'm doing and I can't figure this out? Am I, like, not competent enough to move forward
Mhm.
with the new system? So that is, like, super, super important, yeah.
Yeah, and kinda getting to what you were saying too, there's a lot of technologies that are just gonna continue to be implemented throughout all these different DCs. Coming up in your career, you mentioned the talker that was at your dad's DC. What other sort of technologies as you kinda came up really caught your eye, whether it's hardware or software, where you're like, "Ooh, that's really interesting. That's gonna change the game."
Yeah, yeah, I think it's very interesting because I mean, I've worked in operations that had a lot of technology, and I've worked in some that didn't have a lot of technology either,
Mhm.
right? And one thing that I see is like even though there's tons of options out there, like not everything is like the perfect fit, or maybe too soon for those operations to get to that level, right? It's viable for some, but not viable for everybody in terms of like their maturity level to be able to do that. So I mean, I've worked with lots of like complex sortation, especially in the first role I had there with Simon and Schuster. Very like extensive kind of sortation conveyor system throughout the operation, which was very cool. I really enjoyed that because they had to kind of a full end to end like induction, carbonization going onto the line, utilizing zone picking from a voice pick perspective. And
Mm.
then after inventory, I got promoted to lead their quality control department within the DC. So we actually used weight with a built-in scale within the conveyor that would kick off to the mezzanine if the weight was off. So like
Yeah.
so DIMS and that data had to be like very spot on to make sure the whole system flowed the right way. I think that was probably eye opening in the sense too of like how connected all of these things need to be the more technology you're putting into play. Um, and then another like really kind of interesting experience was working for this company. And this was like right around the time I started the podcast, actually. It was like they had very, very old operations, and they
Mm.
wanted to take those into a brand new facility, modernize it, and, like, it was, like, advancing the operations, I don't know, by, like, 20, 30 years from a technology perspective in, like, a very short window, right? So it was
Mhm.
going from, picking off paper, in this old, old warehouse. I mean, the warehouse, the floors were wooden still, right?
Oh,
So
really?
that's how old it was, yeah. So so I came from this, like, pristine million square foot building at Keurig, and then we went to, like, this
Yeah.
situation. It was, like, a little bit of a shock to me, right? And so we're moving to this kind of brand new facility and, very nice, and we're putting in a shuttle system, we're putting in voice picking, we're putting in these, like, goods to person pick stations, and all these different things was very, like, complex. So that was, like, a lot of change management actually on that
Mm.
aspect. We primarily hired all new staff for in the operation, so that was kinda like a level playing field, but it was, like, the people that interfaced from, like, the corporate office with the operation, there were changes in the way, like, we needed to do things, and that was, like, a huge learning because oftentimes we talk about like master data, right? And
Right.
DIMS, things like that. But they had like none of that really. But we were going into this shuttle system, which was dependent on DIM data
Mhm.
to know how much could fit in individual totes and things like that. And we spent so much time just Cuba scanning stuff.
I
Like,
bet, yeah.
yeah, we had
That is
temp
a
after
whole
temp
tedious
after temp,
job.
just like this line, all right, bring a pallet of stuff, bring a pallet, and I mean, they had like, 30,000 some SKUs, so it was not like, all right, we're gonna do this. I mean, it took weeks to get all the DIM data, and that was things like to think about is like, okay, well, that was kinda like some of that maturity level that I was talking about there, and then another situation that kinda stands out too was, another operation where we were very, like, light on automation. We had, like, small conveyor that would go out to, like, our parcel truck, and that was about it. We had forklifts and things like that, right? But then, my boss kinda gave me the directive. He This was, like, right before, just when, like, Boston Dynamics had first kinda showed stretch, like, doing the
Yeah,
unload. So before
yeah,
commercialization, anything like that, like, he saw that video and he's like, "Oh, we need that, like, figure out how we can get that." And I'm like, "We're not there, like, we're
yeah,
not at that level yet, like, there's so many other things, like, we have to do to go into that." So a lot of those experiences kinda opened up my eyes to, like, alright, like, how much goes into the before of actually, like, implementing stuff like this, or even being at the level where, like, we can consider these options because we are, mature enough or sophisticated enough within our operations to be able to do that. So it's been a lot of kinda interesting experiences looking at that, and I think the other one that stands out to me too, when we talk about change management and like communication, right? We were doing kind of the experimentation with an AMR. Had these so I was assistant plant manager for this company where we had distribution and also like light assembly manufacturing under the same roof, and we would use these carts for to put all the components together. They would pick into the carts, and then the cart would go to the work cell, and they would do the assembly. So we were trying to figure out how do we automate the movement of these carts because they were just getting pushed around manually. So we were looking at a potentially and there was like heavy investment in the carts. They were customized and all this stuff, so they didn't want to like get away from the carts. So we're like, okay, maybe we can use some kind of AMR to move them or like attach to them and pull them to the station. So we brought this AMR to just kind of play around with, and they
yeah,
looked at us like
yeah.
to see, and that thing was on the floor for I don't know 15-20 minutes, and a forklift operator had been with the company for I don't know 15 years or so. Like he pulled up right away, and he's like, and we didn't tell anybody we were going to do this because we really there was no like commitment to anything. It was just like, hey, we'll drop this thing off, like play with it and see what you think if we can do something with it. I was like, okay, sure. Like, and so there's no communication to the employees that like, hey, this is what we're doing, because it was just seemed
Yeah.
like just a little one-off thing. And he pulled up right away. He's like, "Oh, you're bringing that thing in here to take my job?" Like, I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, 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 like that's not the idea." And then there was like this whole explanation, but that was also like an eye-opening moment where it was like, okay,
Yeah.
it's communication, like no matter how small, like there's perception there and there's skepticism around these things. Like we need to be able to convey that and make sure people are aware of like what's going on.
Yeah, I really like some of the things that you're touching on because I think it's so true. Technology is exciting, right? And people wanna experiment with it and figure out, "Okay, how do I make this just transform my operations?" But it's not always the best move, or they need to be, like, stepwise, more phased. So I really like that you're bringing up those points. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanna talk about too with you, on your podcast, you obviously talk to both companies who are trying to provide solutions and the companies who are facing these operational challenges all the time. So I'd be curious to hear from you, like, what are you hearing from both sides of the coin? So what challenges are companies facing still that maybe technology isn't solving, or is it solving the way they hoped it would? What are some of the biggest pain points and bottlenecks in
Mhm.
operations today?
Yeah, yeah. I think actually one of the kind of most recent things that's come up in a couple of conversations that I think is very interesting is kind of tying back to like the maturity and sophistication level of the operation, right? I heard some kind of interesting instances where you know they brought in automation or they've done some pilots around some robotics things, but their operation was not I guess, like, the pristine environment, right, that the
Mm,
like, the robot or the automation needs to operate in. Like I mean, this great example, and I thought this was super interesting, was that somebody is doing a pilot with an automated pallet jack, essentially, right? And and obviously, like that is like kind of a low hanging fruit, very entry level for automation or
Yeah.
or specifically, move pallet from point A to point B. And they asked me the question. They're like, "Is this normal? Because we're doing this pilot and it's only engaging the pallet like 50% of the time. What's happening like the other 50?" They're like, "Well, we have plastic wrap that is like hanging like in between the pallet, but
Mhm.
I guess the perception of the AMR, it doesn't know or it can't perceive that like, hey, it's plastic wrap, like I can put the pallet jack right through that, right? It's thinking it's a block essentially. It's like keeping it from engaging and it's throwing up an exception saying like, oh, there's a barrier here, right? There's something keeping me from doing that. So that's one thing that's kind of like been coming up recently where because I think that like accessibility of these things is starting to come more down market too, but then down market like is a little, not everybody, I won't say, but like is a little less sophisticated in that sense. So having these kind of conditions where this automation can be as effective as possible is one gap that I'm seeing where people are like, hey, like, we have some pallet wrap hanging off the location, but now we need to assign somebody to go around and make sure that's cleaned up because like for like a drone, like, for example, we're using drones for inventory counting
Sure.
and the pallet wrap is getting caught in the propeller, right? So it's kind of like those little things where it's like, all right, these are things that just occur in every operation, whether it's often or from time to time, right? Not every operation is 100% clean and
Right.
perfect, pristine all the time, but the automation and robotics, I find is often kind of very black and white versus like the human mind where the human's like, oh, there's plastic wrap hanging, like pallet jack can go right through that. I'm just gonna engage the pallet, right? Where it's like, whoa, there's a stop here, like there's a barrier,
Yeah.
right, to that. So that's one thing that recently I will say has come up in a few conversations that I think is very
That's
interesting. Just like,
interesting. Yeah.
our location is not ideally set up as it should be, so we're having trouble with like automation engaging with it or being fully effective.
Yeah, and something about these instances on the floor is somehow not being translated to the automation correctly, or no one's investigating it fully and figuring out how to solve that. Yeah, that's interesting. On the flip side, from the solutions perspective, what technologies are you hearing about that are really interesting, you think could be big game changers over the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things going on. Obviously, I mean, we go to the ProMats and ModXs, and it's just kind of overwhelming the amount of different
Yes.
solutions that are out there. And then within the individualized solutions, like the different form factors and ways that people are approaching it. Um, but I think, some of the technologies that stand out to me, I think one right now certainly is like computer vision. Like I think computer vision
Mm,
is having a moment as
yeah.
these definitely. I think there's tons of I mean, there's a bunch of vendors out there now that are utilizing it, but in different applications. And one reason I think that is really exciting is because it's a pretty accessible technology for a lot of people. Like I mean, there's some really interesting vendors that are using computer vision via like existing camera systems. Like, you already have security cameras, like we're going to tap
Mhm.
into those. So that makes it like very easy to implement, but it also unlocks a completely different level of like data capture and visibility that most operations didn't have before, right? And as operations are bigger, there's more employees and more things happening. I think you miss a lot of things as a leader simply because you just don't have somebody in those spots to be able to do that. So I think computer vision is one that's very interesting because it's capturing a lot more data, and whether it's from like a safety perspective, whether it's from a inventory counting perspective, a quality perspective. There's a lot of different use cases there to be able to do that. And I think it's fairly accessible and opens up a lot of opportunity that then ripples out into other parts of the operations
Sure.
and creates better efficiencies overall. That's one for sure. And then I think another one from like an automation robotics perspective specifically that I think is exciting is certainly like the truck loading, unloading, loading, unloading. Um, I say often on the podcast, so I'm on recording saying this, but I definitely like believe um, that especially floor loaded is one of probably, if not the hardest job in the warehouse itself. One of the operations I worked in the past, we did anywhere from like 6 to 8 floor loaded containers unloading a day. And that was one of the hardest departments, one of the hardest areas to keep labor just because it is so just labor intensive. I mean, it's lifting,
Right.
you have to lift at some point, whether you have, conveyor or rollers or something, like you still got to lift. And the kind of flip side there is that, on the loading side, when it's getting loaded overseas, wherever it's coming from, like the buyer, right, is like, well, I'm going to maximize the cube of this container, right? So I'm going to put as much as I can in here possible,
Mhm.
which means that, you're going from floor to ceiling. You got boxes that are like tight up there, and there's awkward positions like you have to get in to really
Yeah.
unload that. So that getting automated, I think, is like a huge unlock for operations in general, and I love to see that, and I think there's some really interesting approaches, like talk about different like form factors, like there's different ways people are approaching that. So that's the other one I would say is like really exciting, and I think is a real kind of game changer in the long term for a lot of operations, not only for the operations and efficiency and throughput, but also for like just the human worker in general. Like
Yeah.
about something where it's like, all right, this is dull, dirty, dangerous. Like that is it right there. I mean, you got a lot of like, potential safety issues that are happening, especially like from a musculoskeletal perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, it does seem like inbound is having a moment. We're also hearing that from some of our customers too. We're actually getting close to wrapping up a solution that we're implementing for a customer of ours right now, where it was taking them at least a week to unload a truck. And now
Wow.
with the automation, it's gonna cut it down to like 2 hours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A week to unload a truck. Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah. I think like just taking the human element out of that. I think like that is like a case where I would say like, why would you not want to like remove
Yeah.
the human from that? Yeah.
Well, as someone with the finger on the pulse of our industry, I'm curious, big picture, long-term vision, 10 years from now, maybe even 20 years from now, what do you think the future of the warehouse looks like?
Ooh, man, that's a tough question. No, I think the future of the warehouse. I mean, there's obviously like a ton of conversation, and I would say I think there was more conversation when I started the podcast in 2019 than there is now
Mm.
around like a lights out dark
Right. Right.
warehouse. Right? Like in 2019, it seemed like everybody was talking about that, and like that was like where things are heading. But I think like we've since I don't know if we've evolved or what what would be the right term there, but like, but it's more around like automating, not necessarily fully lights out, but like still understanding like there is very much this human element within operations that needs to be there because there are things that are like very hard to automate, right? I mean, there's a lot of high touch situations, and I think as we see, obviously a huge segment of the warehouse market are 3PLs too, and there's a lot of variability that happens within 3PLs, and that's hard to fully automate. Like when you
Mm.
have clients that are changing, clients that are changing their SKU profiles and things of that nature. So what does it look like 20, 30 years from now? I mean, that's a long time from now, I would say. But
Where's your
um,
crystal ball? Come on.
yes, yeah, yeah. Let me see here. Let's see. So I think that certainly we'll see more of that fully automated. I mean, obviously it's happening now, and especially like from some grocery perspectives
Yeah, yeah.
and things like that. But I think we'll see that happen more. I also think, we'll see some interesting kind of form factors for warehouses in a sense.
Mm.
Like, I mean, it's been kind of like an up and down approach to like micro fulfillment and
Yeah, yeah.
close to the customer. Like it was like very hot during, COVID, and then it kind of died down because it just didn't make sense like economically. But now we're seeing it kind of trickle back up a little bit. So I think, we may see some like smaller, more unique type approaches to fulfillment, from like a form factor of building or physical location actually to kind of get closer to that consumer. Um, and then I think that, one thing that is very interesting to me is like what does happen to the human worker in the warehouse itself, right? I think that, the way we see it now, right? I mean, an entry level worker in a warehouse is essentially like a material handler, right? Someone moving boxes, pallets around, whatever the case may be. But I do think that that entry level position is going to change a lot. I think it's
Mm,
to become less physical, certainly, as we see like more robotics, more automation come into play. And I think that entry level is going to become more of like a robot wrangler, robot
sure. Yeah.
supervisor, exception handler kind of position. I think that's kind of where we're heading. um
Mhm.
the big gap there is like how are companies like preparing their employees for that?
Yeah, that's a big change management itself.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, we're gonna bring robotics, we're gonna bring automation in, and I think that's like we're not going away from that, right? But we're not gonna bring in, roboticists and, PhDs in robotics, industrial engineering into every operation, right? So it's like, how do we, make these things and kind of the user experience with these things very accessible, which a lot of companies are doing already, like for that just everyday worker that, was, moving boxes around or was picking orders, and now they're just managing exceptions from the robots, and they're troubleshooting when the robot has like a stop for whatever reason, right? So I think that's kind of where we're heading. And then I think that also there's probably going to be a lot more consolidation in the market overall. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of the 3PL space specifically, I mean, there's tons of 3PLs out there, like,
Yeah, yeah.
see, like, different numbers quoted, but it seems like around 20,000 or something is like the number that's out there. So I think there'll be consolidation there, but I also think there'll be like a big kind of differentiator between the larger players and then the more boutique players. Like, I think
Yeah,
there'll be a place for boutique because there's still gonna be very high touch, right? As the consumer evolves, like, the consumer wants more customization, they want
yeah,
more,
yeah.
like, personal type of unboxing experiences, and, like, the large players, like, that doesn't necessarily fit into their model so well.
Mhm.
So I think the boutique will still be there. Um, but yeah, I look kinda like a lot of different things, but I
No, it's
think
all great.
I think that's kinda some of the things that I think off the top of my head is, like, where we're kind of heading.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking to us. Maybe one question to wrap things up that I'd be curious to hear. You've obviously covered a lot of different scenarios, different operations, different warehouses. You've experienced different technologies. Maybe for operators who are newer to automation or maybe just starting their automation journey, what advice do you have for places to research, things to consider, any sort of advice that you have for people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but they should listen to our podcast, right?
There you go.
Both of our podcasts,
Yes.
definitely, to learn more about that. But I think that, to get started, right, I think there is and this was kind of me when I started the podcast, right? There was like a realization of like, whoa, there's a whole big world outside of my four walls, right? And there's tons of other companies, tons of other operations that are doing all kinds of different things. I mean, we're all effectively doing the same thing. We're moving products, shipping boxes, right? Product comes in, product goes out. but we're all doing it very differently with inside those four walls. So I would say definitely, leverage resources. I mean, there's a ton out there now, certainly like way more than when I started the new warehouse in 2019, whether it's, podcasts, LinkedIn, blogs, newsletters. I mean, there's tons of information out there to leverage. So start digesting that, but also reach out to peers in the space,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Other operators. And I mean, there's plenty of ways to find those people, whether it's at conferences or trade shows, or whether it's, you're looking at a specific solution provider and there's case studies and, your customer in there, like reach out to the customer and say like, okay, well, how did you actually get
Yeah.
started with this, right? I think there's a lot of learning to happen there from your peers, because odds are like there is somebody that has gone through like what you're thinking about going through, and make sure you're asking those questions. And I would say, the one thing I found throughout my career that always served me the best was kind of like a never ending curiosity of like what's possible,
Mhm,
right? Like,
mhm.
you know, just dig in and just keep asking like why, right? Or why would we do it this way? Or why would we do it that way? Or how do we do this? Or is this possible? Like how can we do that? And I think there's tons of resources out there to be able to do that. But peers are like the great resource to understand like how did you navigate this? Or even like what did you do wrong that like
Yeah, there
I
you go.
wanted to, right? Like because they'll give you like
Yeah,
the real
yeah.
story, right? Sometimes like, vendors gonna sugarcoat a little bit, but, like, if you talk to, like, the person that actually went through it, like, they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, well, we did this, and definitely don't do that, like, because this was, like, a big mistake," right? So that would be kinda, like, the initial approach, I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. What is the best way for people to stay in touch with you or maybe follow your podcast? How should people connect with you?
Sure. The New Warehouse is on every podcast platform out there, including YouTube. So you can follow there if you want to listen to the podcast, or you can head to thenewwarehouse.com, and that has everything the New Warehouse. And probably the best way to stay in touch with me is just to follow or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kevin. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope to do more of these kind of real life stories and experiences going forward.